My parents agreed to watch my daughter while I attended a friend's wedding. When I returned, I found her crying while washing dishes. My mother laughed. She's a bad girl, so she's working as a maid. My sister smirked while her children played video games. I said nothing, picked up my daughter and walked out. My parents agreed to look after my daughter while I attended a friend's wedding. When I returned, I found her crying while washing dishes. My mother laughed and said, "She's a bad girl, now she's working like a maid." My sister smirked as her own kids played video games. I said nothing, picked up my daughter, and left the small town of Oak Ridge in Westchester County. Carol Wilson worked as a pharmacist, and the locals trusted her gentle smile and dependable expertise. She was a key supporter of the town's health. Carol had divorced Michael 5 years ago, and now lived with her 10-year-old daughter Emily. "Mom, what's for dinner tonight?" Emily asked after school, picking up an apple from the kitchen counter. "How about chicken pot pie?" "Your favorite," Carol replied as she gathered ingredients from the refrigerator. Emily was quiet and reserved, with brown eyes and golden-tinged hair like her mother's, a gift from her father. Rather than speaking much, she expressed herself through music. When she played the piano, she seemed transformed, and Carol took great pride in her talent. "I can play Chopin's Prelude for tomorrow's lesson," Emily said shyly. "Really? That's wonderful. Can you play it for me before dinner?" Emily nodded and walked to the piano in the living room. This should have been a typical happy scene at home, yet a shadow always lingered in Carol's heart, her troubled family relationships. Carol's parents, Martha and George, once ran the popular Collins Italian restaurant in Oak Ridge, but were now retired in a spacious house on the town's edge. Carol also had a younger sister, Diane, who worked at a local real estate firm, and her energetic twin boys, Jason and Joshua, age 8, were known for their liveliness and smarts. "Emily, are we going to Grandma and Grandpa's this weekend?" Emily asked one day. Carol's expression turned startled. "Why do you want to go?" she asked. "Not really, but Jason and Joshua mentioned a new game console at school," Emily explained. Carol's relationship with Diane had been complicated since childhood. Their parents always favored Diane, treating her like a princess, while Carol was burdened with household chores as the eldest daughter. When Carol complained about the unfair treatment, her parents would say, "You're the oldest." Eventually, she learned to accept it, and even as an adult, nothing really changed. Family gatherings quickly shifted to praising Diane's children, while Carol's topics were brushed aside. Despite it all, Carol tried to maintain ties with her family. She wanted Emily to have loving grandparents. Then, an invitation arrived from her college friend Jennifer for her wedding. Carol smiled softly. Jennifer was one of the few who had supported her even after her divorce. She truly wanted to celebrate her friend's newfound happiness. "Emily, what do you want to do while Mom goes to the wedding? Should we have someone over? Or maybe stay at Grandma and Grandpa's?" Emily suggested. Carol hesitated, feeling uneasy about leaving her daughter at her parents' house, but Emily's eager expression made it hard to refuse. Carol called her mother, Martha, who happily agreed. "Of course, Carol, we'd love to see our granddaughter again. Emily can play the piano too. So we're really looking forward to it." "Are you sure about this, honey?" Carol asked with worry. After hanging up, Emily smiled calmly. "It's fine, Mom. I'm excited to play piano with Grandma." Carol gently stroked Emily's hair and began preparing for the next day. On the morning of the wedding, Carol dressed up for the first time in ages. She chose a wine-red silk dress, styled her hair elegantly, and applied tasteful makeup, quite a change from her usual ponytail and simple clothes. "Mom, you look so pretty," Emily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. "Thank you, sweetheart," Carol replied with a smile. "Be a good girl at Grandma's and practice the piano." "Yes, I'll practice," Emily promised, packing her favorite books and sheet music into a small backpack. Carol drove to her parents' home. A large house with a sprawling yard that always stirred mixed emotions. Nostalgia and discomfort mingled there. "Carol, Emily, welcome." Martha greeted them with a bright smile as she opened the door. She hugged Emily and said, "Grandma's been so excited to see you." George appeared behind Martha. "Hello, Carol. You look beautiful in that outfit," he said awkwardly. "Thank you, Dad," Carol replied, placing Emily's bag on the floor. "I put her medicine in her bag. She rarely has asthma attacks, but just in case. And don't forget her allergies." "Don't worry, we'll take care of her," George replied, a bit defensive. "All right then, Emily, Mom will pick you up tonight. Be a good girl," Carol said before leaving. "Enjoy the wedding, dear," Martha added. "Diane will bring her boys later so you won't be bored." Carol hesitated briefly but then checked her watch and left. At the wedding venue, Carol was greeted by an abundance of flowers and warm smiles. Determined to enjoy a night away from work and child-rearing, she mingled freely. "Carol, it's been so long." Jennifer's cheerful voice rang out as she appeared in a pure white dress, the very picture of happiness. "Ginny, congratulations. This ceremony is lovely." Carol hugged her friend. "Where's Emily?" she asked. "I left her with my parents so I could have some time to myself," Jennifer replied. "Don't always focus on your child, Carol. Think about yourself too," Jennifer teased. "Look, there's John over there." she added. Carol laughed nervously. Oh, Ginny, the ceremony was beautiful and moving. Though memories of her own marriage surfaced, she focused on celebrating the joyful moment. Carol danced, chatted with old friends, and relaxed until a message from her mother arrived. Emily is being a bit disobedient. Carol assumed it was about snacks or screen time and didn't worry too much. Are you worried about Emily? Lisa, a college friend sitting next to her, asked. My mom said she's not listening, Carol admitted. Remember, don't just think about your child. Think about yourself too, Lisa echoed. Carol smiled, though her heart began to watch the clock. The ceremony ended earlier than planned, and with growing concern over her mother's message, Carol headed back to her parents' house. On arrival, she found the door open and heard children laughing and a video game playing in the living room. Stepping in, she saw Diane's twin boys absorbed in their game. Jason? Joshua? She called, but they remained focused on the screen. Following the sound of running water, Carol entered the kitchen and was shocked to see Emily crying at the sink, surrounded by a mountain of dishes. Martha was casually sipping coffee and chatting with Diane. What is going on? Carol demanded, anger rising. Oh, you're early, Martha replied coolly. Your daughter wasn't listening, so we made her help out. It's just a punishment. She's working as a maid because she's been bad. Diane smirked, adding, my kids are well behaved there. Just playing games. Speechless, Carol looked at Emily's red, swollen eyes pleading silently. She gently wiped the tears from Emily's hands with a towel and lifted her up without a word. As she left the kitchen with Emily clutched close, Martha called after her. Hey, where are you going? We were still talking. Aren't you going to have some cake? Diane added. I bought it for today. But Carol didn't look back. At the door, she grabbed Emily's backpack. Carol, what's going on? George hurried out from the living room. I'm taking Emily home. I never want to come back here, she said firmly. What are you saying? A little discipline is fine. Her father interrupted. Discipline? What you did isn't discipline, that's abuse. You're exaggerating, Carol snapped. Martha appeared at the entrance. We just had her help out a bit. Carol ignored her and put Emily in the car. After fastening the seatbelt and gripping the wheel, she exhaled deeply. Once in the car, Emily began to cry out, I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't do anything wrong. Through her sobs, she added, I'm sorry. Don't worry, sweetheart. It's my fault for taking you there, Carol said softly, glancing at Emily in the rearview mirror. Do I have to go back there? Emily asked. No, absolutely not, Carol replied with determination. At home, Carol gently seated Emily on the sofa and made her a warm cup of cocoa. The two sat quietly side by side for a moment before Carol finally asked, What happened? Emily shrugged slightly. Grandma said it's better to learn housework, she whispered. Instead of spending time at the piano, when I said I wanted to practice, Grandma lost her temper. Her voice trembled as she declared that I had to wash dishes. I nodded quietly. Meanwhile, Jason and Joshua were busy playing a new video game. Grandma casually remarked that they were special because they were boys. Carol closed her eyes, feeling as if her own childhood was replaying before her eyes. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Carol made up her mind. She would never bring her daughter to that house again, and she planned to keep her distance from them as much as possible. Over the next 3 months, Carol minimized contact with her parents and kept Emily away from them. Phone calls came repeatedly, but Carol simply replied, I'm busy. Diane's messages went unanswered too. During that time, Emily focused on her piano lessons, practicing hard for her next competition, while Carol threw herself into her work at the pharmacy to avoid thinking about her family. One evening, as they were talking about the upcoming contest, Carol asked, What about the next competition? Emily replied, I want to enter, but will Grandma and Grandpa be there? Anxiety flashed in Emily's eyes. No, don't worry, Carol reassured her with a smile. We'll make it a special day just for you. But inside, Carol felt a deep loneliness. What should have been a family celebration of Emily's growth instead became a reminder of broken ties. Then one day, Carol received an emergency call from her mother while she was at work. Her father had suffered a heart attack. Martha's voice trembled on the phone. Carol, your father, she said tearfully, explaining that he had clutched his chest suddenly. With mixed emotions, Carol quickly arranged for a substitute pharmacist and headed straight to the hospital. On the elevator ride, she wondered why she felt so upset. A blend of anger and concern. Entering the hospital room, Carol found her father looking weak in bed, an oxygen mask on his face, surrounded by monitors. George was hardly the dignified man she remembered. Martha sat nearby, holding his hand. Carol, you came, Martha said with tear-filled eyes. How is your father? Carol asked calmly. His life is no longer in danger, but the future looks tough, Martha replied. The doctor had explained that George would need long-term rehabilitation and daily home care. A responsibility Martha couldn't manage alone. What about Diane? Carol asked. I called her, but she hasn't come yet, Martha answered wearily. Just then Diane burst into the room crying out, Dad! As she rushed to his bedside. Later, The three gathered in the hospital corridor to discuss the future. The doctor had recommended weekly nurse visits and daily family care. "I'm sorry, but I have work and kids to care for. I can't help every day," Diane said apologetically. Martha looked lost for words and then asked, "Why don't you help instead, Carol? You're a pharmacist. You know about medications." Diane's eyes shifted to Carol, and in that moment, Carol felt the bitter irony of fate. Now her parents and sister needed her help, and even though she had never forgotten how they treated Emily, she couldn't refuse when her father's life was at stake. "I'll think about it," she answered shortly. When Carol got home, Emily was doing her homework. Sitting quietly beside her daughter, Carol explained what had happened that day. "Is Grandpa going to be okay?" Emily asked, worry in her voice. "He's not in danger, but things will be difficult for a while," Carol replied. After a pause, Emily surprised her by saying, "Mom, Grandpa is having a hard time, right? Why don't you help them?" Then with unexpected determination she added, "I've been thinking. I want to be a nurse. Isn't helping people a noble job?" Carol's chest tightened at the sincere words of her 10-year-old. Both proud and sorrowful at the compassion her daughter showed, Carol hugged her tightly. "You're right, sweetheart," she murmured. The very next day, Carol visited her parents' house and offered to help care for her father several times a week, but only on the condition that she wouldn't bring Emily along. Martha expressed her gratitude but said nothing about Carol's cold distance. Over the next few weeks, as Carol helped with George's care, his condition slowly improved. He worked hard at rehabilitation, gradually regaining independence. Carol used her expertise to manage his medications and monitor his blood pressure. Martha tried apologizing to Carol several times, but Carol simply continued her work. "Remember that day?" Martha would begin, but Carol would change the subject. "I've written down Dad's blood pressure records. Please show them to the nurse when she comes." At one point, as Carol was checking on him, George gently took her hand and spoke in a weak voice. "Carol, I want to apologize for that day. We were wrong." Carol tried to pull her hand away, but he insisted. "No, let me say this. We treated your daughter terribly. I'm ashamed." His voice was soft, yet his words carried immense weight. Tears welled in George's eyes. Unsure how to respond, Carol simply squeezed his hand in return. As time passed, George's recovery continued, and he gradually stood on his own again. His spirit began to shine through once more. Before she knew it, Carol was visiting her parents 3 times a week. One day, while measuring her father's blood pressure, George asked quietly, "Carol, how is Emily doing these days?" For a moment, Carol was speechless. Emily's well-being had always been a taboo subject. Finally, she replied, "She's fine. She's working hard on her piano practice." George gazed out the window. "I'd love to hear her play again," he said softly. Carol looked at her father's profile, his eyes reflecting sincere regret, and felt the heavy burden in her chest ease just a bit. Meanwhile, Diane continued to focus on her own life, barely participating in the caregiving. When she did show up, she usually offered excuses like, "I'm busy with the kids' school events." In the past, this would have irritated Carol, but now she felt strangely calm, believing that Diane should live by her own choices. In the midst of everything, Emily won a piano competition and earned a spot at a regional contest. A short article about her victory even appeared in the local paper, and Carol proudly tucked the clipping into her wallet. "Mom, isn't it amazing? I can go to the regional competition," Emily exclaimed with joy on the day she heard the news. "It really is amazing. I'm so proud of you," Carol said, hugging her daughter. It was a moment when all the hard work paid off. Then unexpectedly, Emily asked, "Can I tell Grandma and Grandpa too?" Carol looked at her daughter in surprise. "Really? Are you sure?" Emily thought for a moment, then quietly nodded. "Yes, Grandpa is sick and having a hard time, so I thought if he knew I won, it might cheer him up a bit." Carol felt a warm glow in her chest at her daughter's kindness, grateful that Emily's heart was much purer than the anger and resentment Carol once carried. The next day, Carol told her parents about Emily's victory. Martha's face lit up with surprise as she immediately said she wanted to attend the regional contest. But Carol was cautious. "I can't let you see her until you apologize to Emily directly," she said firmly. Martha, who had been too afraid to let Emily play piano in public for so long, nodded quietly. "I understand. I'm truly sorry. I want to meet her and apologize." That weekend, Carol carefully checked with Emily if she was willing to meet her grandparents. Although Emily seemed a bit anxious, she agreed. On Saturday afternoon, Martha and George visited Carol's house. George, leaning on a cane yet looking healthier, joined them in the living room. Emily sat at the piano, her expression tense. After a moment, George quietly announced, "Emily, Grandma and Grandpa want to apologize to you. We're sorry for what we did that day. You did nothing wrong." Tearfully, Martha added, "I'm so sorry," her dignified persona replaced by a remorseful softness. Emily remained silent, head down, before speaking in a small voice. "Why did only I have to wash dishes when I didn't do anything wrong?" At that, Martha and George exchanged guilty glances and admitted the truth. They had spoiled Diane's children because those kids had behavioral issues. They didn't listen and broke things, so they'd raise them by keeping them happy. Emily, being quiet and obedient, was expected to help out without question. We were wrong, George said gravely, and now we're seeing the results. Martha added, Jason and Joshua don't listen and are causing problems at school. We made the same mistakes with you, Carol. Carol was taken aback that her parents would finally admit the unfairness she had felt for so long. Silence filled the room. Then Emily slowly stood up and sat at the piano. She began to play a beautiful piece, Chopin's Nocturne No. 2. A gentle, delicate melody filled the room, and everyone listened in awe. When the performance ended, Martha wiped away tears and said, Wonderful, Emily. You truly have talent. Thank you, Grandma, Emily replied, showing a small but genuine smile for the first time. Can I go see the regional competition if Mom says it's okay? She asked, slightly embarrassed. Carol was surprised by Emily's words, but proud of her growth. We'll go, of course. Let's celebrate your special day as a family, she replied. George, clearly moved, said, Thank you, Carol, for giving us this opportunity. Martha and George expressed their gratitude and as they left told Carol, You're a wonderful mother. You've raised Emily so well. We need to learn from you. Hearing these words, tears filled Carol's eyes. They were the recognition she had longed for, yet now they felt less important. Something had shifted within her. She realized that rather than chasing her parents' approval, knowing her own worth and raising her daughter with care mattered most. Thank you, Carol said quietly. From now on, let's all move forward together. George placed his hand on Carol's shoulder, and Emily, with innocent wisdom, had taught them the importance of forgiveness. Carol nodded in silent agreement. Carol looked over at Emily, who stood by the window watching the sunset. The golden light bathed her hair, making her appear almost angelic. Forgiving is freeing, Carol whispered softly. A truth she'd learned over time by gathering the courage to move on instead of being held hostage by past hurts. It was her daughter who had taught her that. On a bright Sunday in the spring, 1 year after Emily's regional competition, Carol's backyard hosted a family lunch. Laughter mingled with the warm sunshine as Martha poured lemonade and asked, Emily, have you chosen your next piece? A gentle smile lit Emily's face as she replied, Yes, I'm going to play Debussy's Clair de Lune. Now 12 years old, Emily had honed her piano skills enough to earn a recommendation to the local music school. George, having fully recovered from his heart attack, rested comfortably in a deck chair, even mentioning, Grandpa will definitely come to your next recital. Carol emerged into the garden with a smile, carrying a fruit platter. Over time, her relationship with her parents had mended, and now they shared dinner together once a month. Occasional differences still arose, but respect prevailed. Mom, are Jason and Joshua coming too? Emily asked. Yes, they'll be here soon, Carol answered. George and Martha had also adjusted their approach with Diane's kids. Instead of overindulging them, they set clear boundaries and taught responsibility. Though the boys resisted at first, they gradually began to change. Just then the doorbell rang. Carol opened the door to find Diane, with the twin boys trailing behind her. Sorry we're a little late, Diane said, her face weary with the stress of parenting struggles, work issues, and a looming divorce crisis. Later, after lunch, while the adults sipped coffee and the children played in the garden, Diane sat beside Carol. In a soft, trembling voice she confessed, Carol, I need your advice. I don't know what to do. The kids won't listen, and Mike is fed up with me. Tears welled in Diane's eyes as Carol gently took her sister's hand. Teach the kids responsibility, and most importantly, respect them just like Emily, Carol advised kindly. With a shaky voice, Diane added, I'm so sorry I didn't do anything for Emily that day. I was only trying to protect my own children. Carol's words offered Diane her first glimmer of hope in a long time. Soon after, Diane began parenting counseling and worked hard to rebuild her relationship with her kids. A piano melody drifted from the living room. Emily had started playing, and the entire family listened in hushed reverence. The beautiful tune was no longer a reminder of past pain. It had become a symbol of healing, renewed bonds, and reconciliation. When the performance ended, Emily announced, In the future, I want to be a piano teacher. I want to share the wonder of music with children. Carol felt a surge of pride watching her daughter's growth. She realized that people could change by admitting past mistakes, offering sincere apologies, and showing it through their actions. Above all, she understood the transformative power of forgiveness.